And read the script as well, little man. Yeah, that's me. What's up, squad? We're trying something different today. My sons are just next to me, so you might hear them cooing or throwing things about and whatnot, or the classic music playing in the background to try and keep them occupied. Apologies, but not actually sorry. You know, I'm a working dad. I gotta do what I gotta do, right? So let's get into it and do what I want to do. What's up, squad? It's your Squid. I recently bought a cool new Bluetooth keyboard, so I've been pumping out these scripts at pace. I hope you enjoy consuming this content as much as I enjoy making it. This video is about Joe Hockey, this guy, and full disclosure, I think he's an absolute douchebag. I expect my bias will be evident throughout the video, so don't come into it expecting an even discussion, I guess is what I'm saying. He was my local member when I lived in Lane Cove for a while, and I thoroughly enjoyed voting against him at every election I could, albeit in vain each time. Before we get into it, I'm just going to give a big shout out to these guys. They support the channel on a monthly basis, and you could too if you wanted to just click the join button below the video and pick a tier. I like money, and turning some of yours into mine on a monthly basis would be ideal. There are also the channel affiliates or the good old super thanks options if you feel like making a once-off payment to support me instead. Literally every dollar helps to keep a roof over my head, so thank you in advance if you decide to do that. But anyway, Sloppy Joe Hockey. He was a self-described career politician and a guy that wanted to emulate John Howard for all of the worst reasons. He was the nation's treasurer during the Tony Abbott-led government post-2010, and he was a guy who embodied all the worst aspects of the Liberal Party in Australia for almost his entire political career. But let's get through the jingle first, shall we? Hit the like button and I'll see you on the other side of the splash, squad. Joe Hockey's career spanned 19 years in public office, and putting it lightly, his ambition was evident for the whole 19. Pegged by industry insiders early in his career to make a big splash on the big stage, he wasted little time in getting his mug on TV as a means to position himself as a man of power. Much like the Labor Party's Kevin Rudd did in the early 2000s, he had a regular guest spot on the nation's highest rating breakfast television show, Sunrise, and he would routinely get into browsing debates with Rudd on whichever current affair was most topical at the time. Due to nationwide political apathy in the early 2000s, which I've spoken about ad nauseum in other videos for this playlist, seriously, check him out if you haven't seen him yet, this regular gig on Sunrise meant that he was one of the most recognisable faces in Australian politics. No one was seeking out politicians to talk to them or listen to them, really, you know. The only time we ever saw a politician was when they were thrust in our faces while we were doing other things that we paid attention to. I'd wager that more than 50% of Australians in the early 2000s only got their political news from the Sunrise segments, for example, but in truth I have no data to back that up. Hockey became the nation's treasurer in Tony Abbott's government when the Liberal National Coalition won back power in 2013. That election ended 6 years of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd nonsense that occurred post the Howard government when the Liberal Party had lost the 2007 election. But the joy would be short-lived for Joe and his mates when the chickens actually came home to roost and they were expected to lead. Putting it simply, a series of poorly chosen phrases and one of the most unpopular budgets in the history of Australia saw Mr. Hockey's dreams of one day converting his Sunrise exposure and becoming Prime Minister completely dashed. If I were to include all of Joe Hockey's gaffes in one video, it would wind up being about 8 hours long, not 8 minutes long, so I'll only give you the big hitters that represent the theme of his time in office and of his budget especially. In April 2014, he was roundly criticised for saying the poorest people don't have cars as a reason to why the cost of living wouldn't be affected when discussing the government's desire to increase the fuel tax. Yes, he actually said poor people don't drive, so it doesn't matter if the government taxes fuel, like that was his logic. Later in the same month, when asked by a young married couple what the government would do or what their plans were to make it easier for people like them to buy property, another cost of living question, his response was that they needed to get good jobs that pay good money, and pivoted the discussion to personal responsibility. He would later state in response to criticism of that the government could seldom promise equality, and that in order for there to be haves, there needed to be have-nots as well. In that very same budget, he tried to single-handedly dismantle Australia's national healthcare system. In his failed plan, he would have seen every visit to a GP subject to a $6 co-payment, and every visit to a specialist subject to a co-payment which would be determined at a later date. Australians from both sides of the political aisle are very defensive of their healthcare system. It's one of the best in the world, and his public comments that $6 co-pays simply meant people would have to forego a couple of beers that week only cemented the fact that he was completely out of touch with everyday Australians, and for some political commentators, represented the final nail in his coffin. Hockey believed that he would be succeeding Abbott as the leader of the Liberal Party were they to lose an election, but his chances of that occurring would be torn to shreds with an internal coup where the party chose Malcolm Turnbull to lead instead. Ironically, after years of campaigning about the Labor Party's instability, Tony Abbott had been knifed by his own party in the exact same fashion that the Labor Party had been knifing their leaders for the prior 6 years. As a last-minute attempt to soothe the mutineers in his party, Abbott had offered to cut Joe loose and completely remove him from the front bench, not just as Treasurer, but in the end that wasn't enough to save either of them. Turnbull had promised the Treasury to Scott Morrison to shore up his support for that particular leadership tilt, which then, when all was said and done, meant that Joe Hockey was left in the dark with neither the Conservatives nor the left-leaning factions of the party seeking his support. As a consolation prize, Hockey was offered the Australian Embassy in Washington, and he resigned from Parliament to go and fulfil that role. He served as ambassador to the US from 2016 to 2020, and he was a regular golf partner of Donald Trump's, or so he likes to claim. Most of the so-called career politicians who found their start in the stability of the Hawke and Keating governments, I suppose the Howard government as well, that could be called stable, caused the instability after and during the Rudd and Gillard years. Of those swamp dwellers, Joe Hockey was one of the worst. Probably the worst if you don't factor in Bill Shorten from the other side of the aisle. His legacy will go down as that of the worst treasurer the country has ever had. The one who promised jobs and growth but resided over recession and higher debt ceilings. He's the guy who advocated personal responsibility and doing the hard yards. Then he got gastric bypass surgery because he's just a fat cunt and couldn't join the gym and stop eating. Of the most two popular politicians in the country for half a decade, the other one managed to become Prime Minister with relative ease, and Joe Hockey fumbled the ball so bad he broke his political neck trying to pick it back up. He's recently published a memoir, and he's doing the rounds on Breakfast TV, Talkback Radio, and popular current affairs podcasts in Australia trying to promote it. I'll not review it either way, and nor would I suggest you do so. Hell, I won't even give you the title because the prick doesn't deserve any more money from the Australian taxpayer than we've already given him, as far as I'm concerned, right? I think it's safe to say, though, that he'll have a high opinion of himself, and he'll represent himself as laudable throughout, which you can take from me, as a person who was there, he most definitely isn't. So I made this video to set the record straight, right? Thanks for listening, guys. Once again, these are the regular financial supporters of the channel. I like money. Turning some of your money into mine on a monthly basis would be ideal, because then I can pay for stuff for this little goober. If this is the first time you've seen one of these videos, one of these Australian history videos, I have an Australian history playlist. Do me a solid, check it out. I earn the most money from those videos in terms of per 1,000 ads and all that sort of stuff. Feel free to give me a super thanks as well if you want. Let me know any other Australian politicians, and let me know if you don't mind the kid noise that eventuated throughout the video and stuff, because I reckon I can make a whole bunch more content if you guys don't mind the kids being involved as I do, right? But anyway, I'll see you when I look at you. You'll see me when you look at me. Say subscribe. Say thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching, guys.